and welcome to the Secular Nation Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Brannon. My accomplice is Michael X.
Hello.
Well, it's been a while since we recorded a podcast. Maybe not too long, but...
It seems like forever, Tim.
I know. With us later in the show will be EdBuckner, co-author of In Freedom We Trust.
See if you can remember the subtitle.
Yes, Thinking.
An Atheist Guide to...
Atheist Guide to Religious Liberty.
There you go. Good. We didn't have a copyright in front of us, so our powers of memory are in place.
Well, in our last episode, we talked with Margaret Downey, in which we briefly touched on the Girl Scouts of America. But I just got this pamphlet from Facebook, which tells us some things you may not know about the Girl Scouts.
Really? Is there a shady underbelly to the Girl Scouts?
According to HonestGirlScouts.com, there is.
Honest Girl Scouts. Well, who can object to that?
You deserve to know what Girl Scout cookies fund. Girl Scouts of the USA National Headquarters benefits from every box of cookies sold through licensing fees the bakers pay to use the Girl Scout logo. GSUSA's cookie income and your donations help pay for association/membership fees to participate in abortion and homosexual rights advocacy groups.
Abortion and homosexual rights advocacy.
Like the National Council for Research on Women, National Collaboration for Youth and World Association of Girl Guides, and Girl Scouts, or WAGs.
WAGs?
That openly partners with International Planned Parenthood Federation. Every Girl Scout is part of WAGs. Partnerships between Girl Scout councils and Planned Parenthood clinics, educators and executives that expose girls to the pro-abortion mindset. Salaries for GSUSA executive staff who are leaders in the homosexual rights movement. Deb Taft, Lynn Cawthron, and Timothy Higdon, as well as media spokesperson Joshua Ackley. Ackley stars in homo-punk music videos that show strangulation of a woman and masturbation, yet he was chosen to facilitate the 2010 Girls Only workshop, hosted, cookie-funded, by GSUSA and the United Nations. GSUSA's movement of inclusion, which recently led it to publicly admit they have been hiding transgendered boys in Girl Scout troops, welcomes them through the 12th grade despite its previous assurances of providing an all-girl experience to its members and their parents.
So in other words, these Girl Scout meetings are dens of iniquity where kids learn about abortion and homosexual rights.
I'm going to go out right now and buy some Girl Scout cookies.
Hell, I'm ready to go join the Girl Scouts if possible.
Well, apparently it's not that hard, but...
But no, that's... yeah, talk about backwards marketing. Here they're trying to get you from, buying Girl Scout cookies, but meanwhile it looks like they're pretty much on the righteous path.
See, what I find funny about this, I don't find it funny at all.
Odd funny rather than ha-ha funny?
They could have just gone with the Planned Parenthood abortion route. Like, that would have been the easy route and just said, Girl Scouts for abortion. They might have gotten more support, but then they had to go really just balls out with this sort of anti-homosexual, anti-trans craziness. Like, that's not going to work. And, I think we should spread more information about this, just so, people should know that Girl Scouts is a stand-up organization, as opposed to the Boy Scouts.
So in other words, folks, go buy some Girl Scout cookies and thank them for seriously what they're doing, because they're certainly a hell of a lot better than the Boy Scouts.
Yeah. I actually love that thing where they say, despite his previous assurance providing an all-girl experience. I don't know, for some reason that reads like somebody complaining about a porno. It's like, this must be, we need some all-girl here. It's like...
An all-girl experience is something a lot of people enjoy.
Yeah, but I think there's a video which I think was taken down, but again, of this girl who was a former Girl Scout complaining that they let a trans Girl Scout in because she's afraid that this, like, a 7-year-old trans is going to rape her or something like that.
Well, wow.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you don't even know how to respond to that or even joke about that. I mean, I've heard about people saying that they're afraid of kids catching the gay, but is it also something that, can you imagine a kid wasn't transgendered being converted to it?
Yeah, really.
Stand to reason.
I think if anything, it will make us more cautious about taking that canoe trip to the other camp across the lake. Anyway, coming up next, we'll be talking to Ed Buckner, author of the book I just said and butchered.
Yeah, it's a really awesome book too. I mean, it's essentially a compendium of really terrific arguments about why the Declaration, why the Constitution, the Treaty of Tripoli show the purpose of our government as being neutral toward religion rather than being fully Christian or even fully atheist. It's a really a good reference, better than having a web page at your hands if you're having an argument with somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we had that conversation with him yesterday, and it was pre-recorded, and here it is. We are here today with Ed Buckner, the former president of American Atheist and co-author of In Freedom We Trust, An Atheist Guide to Religious Liberty. Ed, welcome to our show.
Well, I'm delighted and honored to get to be on your show, and I'm happy, of course, to talk about our book.
Great. So, what was the inspiration or the drive to write this book?
Well, as you mentioned, there are two authors. The other is my son, Michael, who is, as you might imagine, a bit younger than I am. He's only 42 or 3, and I'm 67 in March. But for both of us, over a very long period of time, going back at least 10 or 15 or 20 years, we have waged war in the letters to the editor column and arguments at the water cooler and what have you, about whether this is a Christian nation, whether the government should be neutral and secularism and all of those kinds of things. And we've kept pulling together information and data for it, and it mushroomed over a long period of time. And we said, look, there are a lot of good books out there on atheism. There are a lot of good books out there on church-state separation. But there's not one that's organized the way we want to organize it, and that is comprehensive in the way that we mean for a book like this to be comprehensive. So we got to work on it. It took us several years. It's not something we were in a great rush to get done, but the title of the book, In Freedom We Trust, is, of course, sort of an attack or a play on the In God We Trust stuff that's on our money. But the subtitle has drawn more comment and more, I don't know, maybe not controversy. It'd be nice if it was controversy. But An Atheist Guide to Religious Liberty has apparently misled some people into thinking that it is a book that's primarily for atheists. Atheists, freethinkers, secular humanists are an important secondary audience for us, but our primary audience are really not people without belief. This is not a book that it defends and explains atheism. There are lots of good books that do that. This is a book that explains and defends and gives historical context for secularism, and we argue in this book that that's what makes America an exceptional nation. So instead of it being a book for atheists, it's really a book from atheists, and that's why the subtitle, it refers to the perspective from which we are making our points. And of course, we're unabashed atheist. Avowed atheist is the sneering term that's usually applied to folks like this. So, there are incidentally some arguments, I suppose, pro-atheist, but for the most part, it is not a defense of atheism.
Yeah, the way I read the subtitle was that it was implying that atheists have a unique perspective on religious liberty rather than here's what atheists need to think about religious liberty.
A non-religious guide to religious liberty.
Yeah. You're right that an atheist perspective, or whether it's unique or not, I'm not 100% sure, but it is certainly our perspective as atheists on religious liberty. That's the point of the book.
Yeah, because when I was reading, there's a lot of information in here that I found very interesting, and not necessarily restricted to the interests of an atheist. I think there's a lot for any religious person to take from this book, because I think one of, if not the main thesis, is that religious freedom demands secularism.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would certainly agree. And the non-religious or some religious people, I think all Americans need to understand that really the only way that you can securely protect your freedom to have whatever religious or irreligious views you have is to keep government, which is a very, very powerful thing, whether you're a libertarian or a liberal or progressive conservative. Everybody in America understands that government can be a great force, a great power, and religion has tremendous power. For those of us who are atheists, we see this as, at least in large part, an emotional and maybe even irrational power, but there's no question it's very powerful. And it's extremely dangerous when you intertwine the two of those powers and you create a force for attempting to enforce the correct interpretation of what religion is or is not supposed to be. It's dangerous, and it's not just dangerous. There's this tendency of understanding that a lot of people seem to have that church-state separation is all about protecting the oversensitive atheist. Their feelings are hurt very, very easily, and so we need to make sure they're feeling. And that's just malarkey. That's not the case at all.
If atheists were easily offended, we would be just stuck in a corner most of the day.
Yeah.
And I know some atheists that are pretty easily offended, and I'm certainly offended by church-state separation violations, substantially offended. But the danger is not just to us. The danger is to anyone who cares at all about their religious or irreligious beliefs, because if you let the government decide what counts as a good Christian, and you're a good Christian in your own head, but not the kind of Christian that the majority or some government official has decided, boy, you could be in some serious trouble. Trouble that winds you up in jail or getting executed, or at least trouble that keeps you from getting a job or a promotion, or that hurts your standing as a citizen. So there are very, very good reasons for Christians of all kinds, not just liberal Christians. Fundamentalist Christians ought to care about this a great deal, and they ought to agree with us. And we actually say in our book that we expect you by the end of the book to agree with our main point of view. Now, there are people who will not open their minds to a new idea, and unfortunately, it goes for the occasional atheist as well. And they may not change their mind, but I really think that a very religious Christian who reads this book with anything like an open mind will come to the conclusion, if they don't have that conclusion to start with, that secularism is in their best interest. It's not just to protect atheists.
It's always very delicious to remind Baptists that the Baptists were very keen on having separation of church and state when they thought that the Episcopalians were going to take over the Virginia government, for example.
You got that exactly right, and of course we do cover that some in the book. There's sort of a bifurcation in the Baptist church, but Baptists that know their history include some pretty conservative and very religious Baptists. There's an excellent website called, I think it's called the Joint Committee or the Baptist Joint Committee, that is pro-church state separation, and has all sorts of interesting quotations from Madison and Jefferson and others in support of church-state separation. And even the Southern Baptists, who in general are not what I consider to be the most rational of people, even the Southern Baptists have as part of their, I think they call it the faith call or call in faith, it's their official set of doctrines. And it reads like a constitution. And Article 17, I think it is, one of the articles of this declaration, which has been passed and repassed repeatedly by the Southern Baptist National Convention, says that we should have religious liberty and that the church should not expect the government to do the church's work. So that it's not just one-sided. It's actually, they actually understand something about their heritage. And preachers like John Leland and Isaac Backus and a number of other leaders during the Revolutionary period in America were strong supporters of church-state separation because, like you said, they didn't want the Episcopalians telling them what to do. And it wasn't just academic. They actually threw Baptist preachers in jail for telling people to read the Bible for themselves and things like that. And James Madison wrote to a friend of his. He was actually horrified at the idea that in the county next to his in Virginia, some of these Baptist preachers had been arrested. And he just thought, I think, of course, quite wisely, that this was an outrageous thing for the authorities to be doing. And, that there are Baptists who overclaim just a little bit and claim that the First Amendment and religious liberty in the Thomas Jefferson's statute of Jefferson was the author of a Virginia law of tremendous importance. It was not passed until he was out of the country and over in France, but Madison pushed to get it passed. Jefferson's 3 proudest accomplishments, according to his tombstone, for religious liberty. And there are Baptists who claim that Jefferson and Madison got all their ideas from the Baptists and that they're the ones that are responsible for this. That's an exaggeration, but it's not an exaggeration to say that people like John Leland had some serious influence and impact on this. And Madison's memorial and remonstrance in Virginia got thousands of people to sign on. The Baptists were certainly very active in supporting that and getting signatures, and that led to the Virginia Statute for Religious Liberty.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when a lot of people talk about Christian American, or they sort of thinking of Christianity as if it's this monolithic thing when, it's a collection of very different sects that occasionally are very much against each other. I mean, just with this last election, with the near rejection of Governor Romney for his Mormonism.
Right. There were right-wing extremist or fundamentalist Christians in this country who were bitterly denounced Romney for his Mormonism. There are Christians who insist that the Church of Latter-day Saints, as the Mormons are officially called, that they're not a Christian church. Of course, it's the Christian Church of Latter-day Saints, and they certainly consider themselves Christians. I'm not particularly interested in who's right in that fight. I'm happy to have them disagree with each other about what counts as a real Christian. I don't even care whether you consider Thomas Jefferson a real Christian. He called himself a real Christian, but he also said he didn't believe in the resurrection. He didn't believe in atonement. He didn't believe in a life. Well, he did believe in a life after death in some sort of strange, twisted way, but he did not believe in the virgin birth or a whole bunch of other things that are fairly important to some Christians. But one of the most, you mentioned the Constitution, one of the most interesting things to ask a Christian who says this is a Christian nation is to say, okay, let's take the United States Constitution, which is our governing charter, and just go through this Constitution. Take your time, find the parts in there that are explicitly Christian, that are enforce Christianity, and find the parts in there that are even clearly derived from Christian principles, biblical principles. And then get back to me and let me know exactly what those were. Very strange, because there aren't any. There really are none. There are ideas in the Constitution which are not necessarily contradictory to a particular interpretation of the Bible or a particular notion of what constitutes Christianity. There were some that, in the original Constitution in particular, there were some that are pretty clearly anti-biblical. The idea that, or at least in the Constitution as now amended, giving women the right to vote and allowing them to speak up in public, that's not a biblical idea, and it's arguably an anti-biblical idea. Being opposed to slavery is quite arguably and reasonably an anti-biblical position, because the Bible's fairly clear in supporting slavery as an institution.
How about rebelling against your divinely appointed king?
I was going to say, that's actually the biggie. The number one main reason that the Constitution is not biblical. My son, Michael, my author, is actually more of an expert on this than I am. But the Bible, I think it's in Romans, says that you should obey the duly constituted authority, that they are from God, that they are of God. And rebelling against a government figure is anti-Christian. It's an anti-biblical thing to do. So there's some awfully good reasons why fundamentalist Christians should understand that our government is not a Christian government. It's not anti-Christian either, despite the fact that some aspects of our government are in opposition to some Christian or other theistic principles. The government is not set up to be one that's supposed to keep Christianity in its place. We have the fairly absurd notion that we get all the time that Christians are the huge majority, 80, 90% of the country, which is a gross exaggeration, and that they're oppressed.
We have a lot of power, I guess.
It's obviously on its face a foolish idea. It's certainly further evidence that this is a secular nation and not a Christian nation. And this isn't new. This is not something that the Supreme Court brought about in the 1940s or something. This is something that's been true of this nation from its inception as a nation. Now, if you want to start talking about things like the Mayflower Compact or the Magna Carta, or things that came about long before this country, we can talk about some of that too. But the Constitution of the United States is actually our original document. The Declaration of Independence, about which we have an entire chapter, and it is another thing that is one of my son's matters of expertise. But the Declaration of Independence is a terribly important document. It's inspired people worldwide. It really matters a great deal, but it's not our governing charter. And if you read the Declaration of Independence with great care, you will see that it doesn't have Christian principles in it either. I mean, the biggie that you mentioned earlier, of rebelling against the government, that's not acceptable.
One of the things that's funny about that to me is that, you look at the Declaration or you look at the Constitution, they were carefully written documents written by very intelligent, careful writers. Yet somehow you would expect the Christians who disbelieve in secularism that somehow Madison or Jefferson put pen to paper and that said, oh, crap, I forgot to put Jesus in there.
Well, I have to say, when people tell me this is a Christian nation, I say, are you saying that the framers of the Constitution, and what you were talking about just then is the Declaration, but the framers of the Constitution meant to put in Christianity and they forgot? Doesn't strike me as too likely. I mean, they were, as you say, acting very intentionally, purposefully, and not just one wild radical individual. This was the group. Now, some of them were Christian, some of them were religious, but the government they founded was not a Christian government. And I started to make a point a while back, and I forgot to finish making it. So bear with me. Let me finish making it now. I said that the primary audience for our book is not atheists and freethinkers. They are a very, very important secondary audience. The primary audience, the ones we really want to read this book and understand it, are those reasonable, good, well-intentioned religious people who have some misunderstandings about the fact that this is not a Christian nation, or think that it is, or that religion should be involved so that we can be moral. Those are the primary target. But that group of people, the freethinkers and atheists and secular humanists who are most likely to be listening to your podcast, are the very, very important secondary audience, because all of us, those folks and the two of you and me and my son and everybody, all the other atheists and freethinkers, need to be well educated about what the history of this country really is and what secularism means and what it doesn't mean. And there's some misunderstanding among atheists and freethinkers, but mostly they need to have the details at their command so that they can argue well, make the right case, write the correct letter to the editor, win that argument at the water cooler, help to persuade the local city council to do the right thing, etc.
One of the chapters in your book is referring to the Treaty of Tripoli, which, it's one of those things that gets thrown around a lot in arguments, but I think it's one of those chapters in history that, if it doesn't have anything to do with the Civil War or World War II or the auspicious incident of 1826 in the Ottoman Empire, people don't really know about it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how long we're going to do this podcast. If we've got 4 days or a week or 2 weeks, I can tell you all I know about the Treaty with Tripoli, but I love it. It's one of my favorite topics. My wife insists that I talk about it in my sleep. I don't think she ever literally said that, but I think she has heard me give talks about it often enough that I think she could give a talk about it, maybe in her sleep. But the Treaty with Tripoli actually is a very interesting document and an important one for our point. Now, it's actually not an important treaty in terms of world history or American history. One of the interesting things about it is it came about literally because of attacks on the United States by Muslim extremists. And people think 2001 is when we really started getting attacks from Muslim extremists, or maybe they think of the USS Cole or some earlier incidents, but they still think of it as a reasonably modern phenomenon. It's not. Even before there was a United States, there were Barbary pirates, which has a sort of a romantic sound to it, but actually they were extremist, and they used their religion as an excuse frequently and repeatedly. The profit motive with an F, P-R-O-F-I-T, was probably a more important reason for them doing what they do, but they attacked ships and they demanded tribute from governments, and if they didn't get it, sometimes even when they did get it, they would attack the ships, take the seamen who were working on the ship as slaves, make money off of them, steal the stuff that was on the ships, and so forth. And they said, we're justified in doing this because these folks are not furthering Islam. They're not doing what the Prophet Muhammad wants them to do, so we're justified in making war. In 1796, George Washington was still the president. It was very near the end of his second term. In November of 1796, November the 4th, an agreement was reached between the Bey of Tripoli, that's B-E-Y, he was the ruler of Tripoli, he was not elected, as you might well imagine, and the United States. So the Bey and people of Tripoli and the citizens of the U.S. Agreed to this treaty. The treaty said in Article 11, as the government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian nation, and then it went on to reassure the Bey and people of Tripoli that the U.S. was not going to be engaged in a religious war, that we had a secular government. That treaty it took several months to get back to the U.S. It was finally introduced into the U.S. Senate in the spring of 1797. It was printed up in English. There's some reason to make an emphasis on that because the Arabic version of it, there's some controversy over whether that actually had the Article 11 in it or not. It doesn't really matter because the U.S. Senate voted unanimously in favor of the English version, and it was printed and they saw it in front of them. They voted unanimously to support this treaty that says, as the government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. President John Adams, signed it, proclaimed it. It was printed in the newspapers of the day. I've actually held one of those newspapers in my hand and seen several others. And there was no uproar. What's interesting about it is not that it made a big splash, but that it didn't. Nobody was surprised. Everybody understood in 1797, just 10 years or so after the Constitution, that this is not a Christian nation. The government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. There's more to that story, and you probably need to read the book and read that chapter. But as I said, that's one of my hobby horses. You want to get me talking, you can just mention Tripoli, and I'm off.
You're right. It's if anything an indication of the thoughts and feelings of the day.
Yeah, it's not important, particularly as a treaty. It didn't work. It didn't stop the Barbary pirates. We had to go to war with them under President Thomas Jefferson. From the shores of Tripoli to the halls of Montezuma is one of the lines in the Marine hymn. That's because we actually had warfare, battles with the Barbary pirates, and won. And Stephen Decatur became a hero, etc. So there is not much importance to the treaty as a treaty. It didn't stop the war. It didn't stop the problem. And 4 years later, it was superseded by another treaty, which didn't put any of this stuff in there. But it's very important as a reinforcer of the idea that the Constitution is free of religion. Now, the most important document for that is the Constitution, because I get to just read it and find all those Christian passages, which aren't there. you'll know that we're right about this. Now, there's little bits like the dating of the Constitution. Dated in the year of our Lord and in the year of our independence. And the year of our Lord stuff was the way all formal documents were dated in those days. And it's to say that that's an indication of religious meaning or belief or conviction would be the same as saying, well, if we happen to be talking on, say, Friday, that you worship the goddess Freya, because that's what Friday's named after, or if we were talking on Thursday that you worship Thor. And they're all the days of the week and many days of the month have religious implications which are totally ignored because of the conventional dating. They're historical artifacts, and that's essentially what in the year of our Lord business on the Constitution is as well. There's nothing in the body of the Constitution that supports religion of any sort. In fact, it actually specifies that there shall be no religious test for any office under these United States. So the Constitution is not anti-religious, but the Constitution is very much pro-secular, allowing a religious point of view to carry the day or to be the basis for further decisions.
On another, related issue, obviously, is your distinction between public and civic. Could you go into that a little bit?
I can a bit. I should tell you that if you're going to interview, as I understand, or Michael Buckner at a future interview, he's a better one to ask about that than I am. That was certainly one of the chapters that he was the primary author on. But the main thing, all you have to do is think about this. Imagine a courthouse in the middle of a small town. It's the county seat, so the courthouse is in the middle of the town. On the four corners around that courthouse, there might be a hardware store and a Baptist church and a Catholic church and a Jewish temple, or maybe these days a mosque. All of those are in the public sphere, but those of us who support secularism and that are atheists but thoughtful about it would not want the government to come along and tear down one of those churches or that mosque or that temple. So public means different things in different contexts, and the opposition that we consistently bring to prayer or religious observances as a public matter is when the government, the agency or individual who represents all of us, is involved. So if a public school teacher says to his or her class, now let us pray, they are violating the Constitution, the First Amendment of the Constitution, because they are making a religious decision for citizens, or at least in this case for children of citizens. And it's not that religion's not important, it's that it's too important to be letting the government muck about with it. We don't want the Ten Commandments to be posted in a courthouse, Roy Moore to the contrary notwithstanding. And we don't want to have religious invocations before city council meetings. And this is not because it's not because the government is making a decision about religion being a bad thing. It's that the government doesn't get to decide. So public in the sense of being, you put a yard sign in your front yard, that's public. That's in public space. People can see it as they drive down the road. If you put it inside your house, that's private as opposed to public. So public meaning government or owned by and operated by all of us has a different meaning than public in the more broad sense that we're talking about. And the Swiss are more likely than we Americans are to restrain or restrict somebody. I mean, in Switzerland, they've actually banned minarets, the little bits on top of mosques that declare that it's Muslim. In the U.S., that would never happen, and I don't think the Swiss are right. I mean, I'm no Muslim, but I don't think the government should make distinctions about what religious symbols you can have on your own building, whether it's a group or an individual's building.
Yeah, that means they'd have to shut down the Taj Mahal casino across the bay from us.
Well, that might be a good idea for other reasons, but...
Yeah, it's kind of tacky.
Anyway, I urge you to bring that up with Michael Buckner if you get a chance to talk to him.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Ed Buckner, the co-author of In Freedom We Trust, an atheist guide to religious liberty, and that's available.
It's amazing, and it's really heartening to me that it's available almost everywhere. You can go to about 40 different libraries in the U.S. and check it out, which excites me. You can go online to an online bookseller in South Africa or Ireland or Australia or New Zealand and or India and buy a copy of the book. And you can certainly buy it from Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Prometheus Books, the ones that published it, or Books A Million. You can buy it online from Target. So, there's no excuse to not go out and buy the book.
Well, that's great to hear. Well, hopefully we'll see you sometime on the Jersey Shore.
Yep, I like the Jersey Shore. I hope it's at least starting to recover now from the horrors of Hurricane Sandy. And I'm delighted indeed to have gotten to have this conversation with Michael X and Tim Brannon, and it's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you very much.
The Secular Nation podcast is brought to you by the Atheist Alliance of America. If you would like to become a member, you can go to our website at atheistallianceamerica.org. That's atheistallianceamerica, all one word, .org. Click on the support tab and select membership.